Booyah. It's another week, another set of bad actors, malicious files, and compromised systems. On today's show, we're going to be talking about some of the awesome intel being shared by our even awesomer InfoSec community, and a huge thank you to all those folks that take their time to share their knowledge with the rest of us. If you enjoy listening in on these intel chats and aren't in our community forum yet, then you should join the conversation. Lots of information is being shared there, and you will get it in real time. You can join us at community.limacharlie.io. And as always, for these conversations, I'm joined by the one and only Matt Bromley. How are you doing today, sir?
Chris, great to see you. I'm doing well. I'm looking forward to this. It is the middle of June, 2025. And I can't believe we're here. We're doing this. There's been so many things going on in the world in the past couple of weeks. We're not going to talk about all of them. Some of them international, geopolitical, politically motivated, all sorts of things happening. We'll keep our magnifying glass on some top cybersecurity issues, but just a heartfelt, I feel you to the folks out there going through a lot of other stuff right now.
Yeah, a lot of big stuff to look at. So let's just keep the blinders on and focus on what we do best. Yeah. All right. I think you're going to love the new one. You know, I usually am pretty down on the funny names, but I'm a fan of this one. So a new malware strain known as OtterCookie, developed by the North Korean APT group Lazarus, has been dissected in a detailed technical analysis by offensive security expert Mauro Eldritch. Unlike malware that spreads via pirated software or malicious USBs, OtterCookie is part of a deceptive and targeted campaign dubbed Contagious Interview, or DevPopper. The campaign uses fraudulent freelance job offers to deliver malware disguised as seemingly innocuous Node.js development tasks. Targets are primarily professionals in the finance, tech, and cryptocurrency industries. The campaign was uncovered through a collaborative investigation involving the Bitso Quetzal team and analysis via the Any.Run sandbox. The infection begins with a clever social engineering move. A recruiter contacts a developer on LinkedIn and offers freelance work to fix a visual bug in a decentralized app. The associated Bitbucket repository appears entirely clean on the surface, no suspicious scripts, malicious dependencies, or tampered packages, but when executed, the Node.js app fails on purpose using an intentional syntax error. This triggers a try-catch block that fetches code from a remote API, disguising the payload as an error message. Wow, that's clever.
Right?
The payload is then executed using require, a function called require, infecting the system under the guise of normal error handling. This technique circumvents static analysis and AV detection by keeping the payload entirely remote and obfuscated until runtime. Wow. That's sneaky and kind of brilliant. I hate to give them credit, but I don't think I'd catch that.
I got to say, this was a wild thing to read about and to experience. Not experience firsthand, but just to kind of go through the different code and see how it worked and everything like that. I mean, what a kind of novel approach, if you will. Not that we're giving a threat actor any sort of a compliment, but what a novel approach to kind of finding a way to deploy and get people to run code and stuff. And Chris, I think, you know, we've talked about before some of the biggest issues that folks run into whenever they get into this kind of like, you know, phishing or code delivery thing is getting past that element of trust, right? Like, it's really easy to write a piece of code that does a thing. How do I get someone to run this without them being suspicious of what I'm trying to do here? And I think this is a pretty novel approach from a threat actor perspective of like, hey, it's going to be a test. I'm going to give you some code to check or something like that, you know, number one. But then it goes even further, and I think you're going to cover a little bit about what it does once the code gets in there. Obviously, you know, there's some financial fraud or some theft at hand because it's a North Korean backed threat, or it's a North Korean nexus threat, if you will. But I just find it like just a fascinating kind of sequence of events. You know, we've heard about and talked about North Korean workers masquerading as job candidates trying to get roles at companies. We've even kind of joked about, you know, the standing orders from the supreme leader are go get a job at a tech company. But the flip side of this is actually utilizing a trusted code delivery execution process to get someone to run a piece of malware. And then the other thing, Chris, you might talk about this in just a second here, but the other interesting part I thought was they're utilizing decentralized apps as lures, which I think kind of narrows the field to the type of target that they want as well. Not every JavaScript coder is a decentralized app programmer, developer, or has the wherewithal of what some of this functionality may mean. So they're kind of narrowing the field, I think, to who their target is. And I know you're going to cover this next.
I suspect they're probably trying to get access to cloud infrastructure so they can run crypto miners.
Either that, or I'm thinking cryptocurrency wallet theft.
Ooh. Yes. All right. So once inside the system, OtterCookie begins its typical routine of credential and wallet theft. It pulls in modules that allow interaction with browsers, file systems, and OS-level processes. Specifically, it targets major browsers, Chrome, Firefox, Brave, Opera, and popular cryptocurrency wallets like Solana and Exodus. It extracts Solana profile directories and other wallet data, then moves on to macOS keychains and browser-stored credentials. Interestingly, it also harvests NFTs in some cases, not for resale, but because certain Web3 environments use them for authentication. Before exfiltration, OtterCookie compresses the collected data into .tar archives and sends it via port 1224 to a command and control server in the US, an exfil pattern identical to earlier Lazarus tools such as Invisible Ferret. The final stage involves downloading and deploying Invisible Ferret, a cross-platform rat written in Python. OtterCookie installs a portable Python distribution suitable for the host OS and executes the rat, establishing long-term persistence. Sorry, I'm just laughing because I'm thinking about what my mom would think if she was listening to this episode. We've got an invisible ferret and a cross-platform rat written in Python, and then the OtterCookie. What is happening?
It's a whole zoo. It's Noah's Ark in this one.
That's right. So Invisible Ferret is known to use tools like AnyDesk to maintain covert access. Throughout the process, any.run sandbox identifies and logs activity at multiple stages, including the initial obfuscation, API call execution, credential theft, and final stage deployment. The modular reuse of code and infrastructure between OtterCookie, Beavertail, and Invisible Ferret highlights Lazarus's evolving but consistent TTPs and financially motivated cyber espionage.
They're just playing with us now. OtterCookie, Beavertail, Invisible Ferret. Come on. They're just playing around. I feel like we're reading a children's storybook here.
Well, this brings up something I talk about all the time, and I just saw Jen Easterly post about it a week or two ago again, and I think I shared that link with you, and it's we really got to name these things better so they actually convey to the casual observer what they are. Like, this sounds cute and funny, when the reality should be, no, this is like a adversarial nation trying to steal finances or shut down our critical infrastructure. It's not,
So I've actually always had this idea, Chris, and I don't know if this is true or not. I've never asked anyone about it. I know when I have named malware in the past, and we're talking a long time ago, but when that was something that I did, I would intentionally choose children's toys as a little bit of a slight or like a demeaning thing, to kind of like not give the threat actor any sort of credit. Like, because when you read about a piece of malware, and if you were to hear about something and you were like, oh, what's the name of that, remote access tool or that Trojan they developed, and it was like, Vicious Destroyer or something like that, you're like, oh, it just sounds awful. I think actually, if I remember correctly, I think it was the Olympic Destroyer malware. Always like, wow, that's such a severe term, but I've always been of the hope that they're given such soft, cute, and cuddly names to demean or kind of diminish the threat level. It's easier to be like, oh, OtterCookie, that's so cute, and you're not like, this is a very totalitarian run nation state who's trying to steal billions of dollars from people around the world. This is OtterCookie, right? It makes it a little bit easier to digest. But then the problem with that, Chris, is the line between us joking about this inside of a SOC and then this rising up to a board meeting looks really ridiculous.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you go the other way and someone's like, hey, Matt, Chris, I work in, such and such industry, or what are the different types of, human targeting threats that are out there? And you and I, in a very serious, suit and tie get up, say, let me tell you about Beavertail and OtterCookie. This is your biggest threat.
With Invisible Ferret.
Yeah, not to be confused with the Invisible Ferret that we talked about earlier, right? Yeah. OtterCookie and Beavertail, that's the real threat. You'd get laughed out of the room.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
And no offense to anyone who's actually named these or anything. It just, I agree with you, and I agree with Jen Easterly, indirectly there, of we need to have a different way to refer to them. I do think that if all the threat actor naming conventions we've talked about, some of them have come across as, more marketing centric. Not that that's a bad thing. There is a nomenclature to the way like CrowdStrike names what they name. So the animal is respective of the region, the threat actor, the country. Yeah, usually the nation state that it's associated with. But even there's some tongue in cheek. Iranian threat actors are kittens. And it's just like, we just can't help ourselves of like making it cute and cuddly, right? Yeah. Nonetheless, I agree with you. And I wish there was different ways to talk about it. But hey, we could easily turn this article into a bedtime story.
Yeah. I might feed that into ChatGPT and see if it can make me a children's story using that description there.
Utilize this thing, create a soft and cuddly story involving the beaver and the otter. But you could go far with this one.
All right. Up next, attackers are currently exploiting a critical vulnerability in the Langflow pattern, an open source Python-based web app used to build AI workflows and agents to deliver a new botnet called Flodrix. The issue is tracked as a CVE and it carries a CVSS score of 9.8, indicating its high severity. The flaw resides in Langflow's code endpoint, where the application fails to enforce authentication or code sandboxing, allowing arbitrary code execution. This opens a door for unauthenticated attackers to send crafted post requests and fully compromise affected servers. Versions prior to 1.3.0 are vulnerable. According to Trend Micro, this vulnerability is being actively exploited in the wild. The attackers are leveraging publicly available proof-of-concept code to scan and compromise exposed Langflow instances using tools like Shodan and FOFA to identify targets. Once initial access is gained, the threat actor runs basic reconnaissance scripts, profiles the environment, and proceeds to drop the Flodrix malware. The malware is delivered via a bash script called Docker and attempts to run ELF binaries suited for various CPU architectures. Interestingly, it uses argument-based conditional execution. If the payload fails to execute properly, it deletes itself to evade detection. That's interesting. And there's an example of somebody who released some POC code a little early. Now the script kiddies are up on Shodan and trying to get in where they can.
All over it. I actually took a look at the GitHub repository that contains the code, and the first line of after the disclaimer, which allegedly is made for educational and ethical testing purposes only. Chris, underneath the overview, there's a section called Getting Started, and the first part of Getting Started is finding targets. So, just saying. For those of you out there publishing exploitable POC code who think, oh, I'm doing this to help the good guys, and you start off with finding targets, I got to say, it's kind of like if I gave you a drone and I said, only fly this thing to take pictures. And then the first chapter of the manual was how to attach a weapon to it, which it just blows my mind. I mean, this is one of those things. Now, we could sit here and focus on kind of like the CVE and the tech code of it, Chris, but this is one of those moments where we've talked about, exploited vulnerabilities again and again. And this is one of those moments where I'm going to say, don't BS the internet and make it look like you're doing something helpful here. All right? I don't responsible disclosure or not. You're posting this so that people can use it maliciously. You're causing a lot of issues for a lot of organizations that are out there. I don't know what the disclosure process looked like. I don't know if they went through a responsible one. I know the CVE and patch and everything out there, patch, of course. But this is something that really got under my skin a little bit, Chris, just because this is we're kind of returning back to like legacy security days where people are publishing code because it's fun. And that thing may end up being, causing a significant damage somewhere. And I mean, you gain what, street cred in a GitHub repo?
Well, that's what I was going to say. I think people do it because they feel like it gives them street cred, but the internet's memory is long, and if you try and move forward in your professional career, that's the kind of stuff I think that stands out as a slash against your integrity, which is something we want in security, right?
Yeah, agreed. And then even further, and I'm not picking on anybody in general here, but this isn't unique. This particular user on GitHub actually has a repository full of this type of stuff, full of these types of CVEs and different POC code and everything like that. So whether or not they actually wrote it, I'm not entirely sure. Maybe they just kind of copied it because it seems to be their MO. But I'm just going to throw out there and just say, like, look, if you're running this, if you're relying on the open source Langflow platform, please, by all means, like patch and just be careful about what you're doing and watch out for malicious access and things like that. But to people who think it's cute and cool to post this kind of stuff and share it and get your street cred up, all right, well, internet remembers, and just to say, like, there's responsible ways of going about this. Yeah. And I really hope that process was taken care of. Now, I'll be very clear about one thing, Chris, is that there have been plenty of moments in the history of internets where someone has tried to responsibly disclose something, and then an adversary, the kind of responsible party, the software company or whatever
I think
it is.
You mean Microsoft, if I'm remembering correctly, but
has just kind of been like, nope, not us, right? Not us. And obviously, if that's the situation, there's definitely a differing opinion of like, well, I tried to responsibly disclose, but that didn't happen. But if you just go right towards, hey guys, here's how to hack into this thing, and by the way, here's how to identify a list of targets. Yeah. You're handing it up on a silver platter, and then you're trying to disclaim it away as saying, well, I only did it for security purposes. Yeah. It's like robbing a bank and saying, I was just testing your defenses. You didn't know?
All right. So the underlying payload in this campaign is a variant of the Lee-Hoser malware family, which brings with it enhanced stealth mechanisms. These include anti-forensics features such as self-deletion, removal of runtime artifacts, and string obfuscation that masks the C2 infrastructure. The malware is executed by embedding malicious code inside default argument values or decorators of a Python function, a technique that bypasses Langflow's missing input validation. Because of the architecture of the Langflow platform, such payloads are evaluated in the server context, which allows remote code to run unchecked. Organizations still running vulnerable versions of Langflow, especially if exposed to public networks, face significant risk, including full system takeover, data theft, and use of their infrastructure in DDoS operations. Trend Micro recommends upgrading to Langflow version 1.3.0 or later, which fixes the issue by enforcing authentication via a new parameter in the affected function. Additionally, orgs should restrict external access to Langflow endpoints and monitor for indicators tied to Flodrix, especially since the botnet is capable of accepting TCP commands for launching network-based attacks. The combination of active exploitation, ease of access, and powerful malware payload makes patching and hardening Langflow deployments a critical task. So, you have your marching orders, folks. You've heard them before. I even made a t-shirt for Matt. So
patch.
There we go. I feel like it's going to be the thing eventually where it's like, hey, Matt, do the thing. Like Bart Simpson, where they tell him to say. Anyway.
Yes.
Yeah.
I am going to always have that shirt on hand now. So that way you can, yes, from now on, that command will trigger a response.
My daughter actually commandeered my copy of that shirt. So
what are you going to do? That's where it is. Okay, then. Okay.
All right. Next up, a new campaign from an emerging threat group named WaterCurse is targeting the software supply chain by leveraging GitHub repositories that masquerade as legitimate security tools. Researchers, again, at Trend Micro have linked this operation to a broader pattern of adversaries exploiting trust in open source ecosystems, specifically aiming at users who depend on community-contributed code bases, including penetration testers, cybersecurity professionals, game developers, and DevOps engineers. These attackers have been planting malicious Visual Studio project files and build scripts that stealthily deliver malware during routine development workflows. The repositories typically pose as penetration testing tools, but the project configurations have been tampered with to include payloads such as SMTP Email Bomber and Sakura Rat. These components are embedded in the VCXproj or CS project files, formats used in Visual Studio projects, which can automatically execute scripts as part of the build or debug process. Once run, the malware initiates a multi-stage infection process. Trend Micro observed capabilities for data exfiltration targeting stored credentials, browser session tokens, and other locally cached authentication materials. The RAT functionality also provides persistent remote access to the attacker, effectively establishing a long-term foothold on the compromised system. Another really stealthy way to get that malicious payload onto the system. It's hidden in the build process, and nobody's reading the code as it runs past the screen, right?
And that's the thing is, it's just another way. I think, we've seen this for years. It's not necessarily new, but I think adversaries are continuing day in and day out to just really take advantage of the way that build development processes happen. and kind of the human side of it. Chris, I think the example you gave was perfect, right? The kind of brrr of stuff that happens on a screen during a build process is really just kind of like expected noise. In fact, a lot of people, might click or hit build and then just change tabs or change screen focus or step away, right? You don't sit and watch it and read through all of it. And if an adversary can find a way to sneak inside of these tiny little, hiding in plain sight moments and stuff like that, there can actually be some interesting avenues there for them. I find it funny here, right? It talks about a series of GitHub repositories masquerading as legitimate security tools. First off, another interesting name, WaterCurse. But, as InfoSec professionals ourselves, I feel like this one's a little targeted here, coming after us, because the group's targets to go, and I'm reading from the post here, beyond cybersecurity professionals and do suggest a financial motivation. Again, I just kind of find that one a little bit of an understanding of what their targets are and what their targets might lead to. Right? Kind of similar to what we talked about with the first article, where it was targeting developers of decentralized applications, but the real objective was cryptocurrency wallets, right? If you're going and targeting after a kind of security focused repository, what are you targeting? Well, you're targeting InfoSec professionals who might know more about how to stop or block malware. They might have insight into different environments or ongoing breaches and things like that. And I just continue to find that a really interesting approach for threat actors when you see this level of granular targeting from a campaign, because it shows that there really was a true objective at hand, right? Mm-hmm. This isn't an opportunistic thing. Like, let me just publish some malicious code and see what happens.
Yeah.
Right. This is, I am going after a group of people who I think are likely going to utilize this code at some point.
Yeah. And it could even be as targeted as, I know this particular organization uses this particular tool. I want to get downstream to one of their customers. So I'm going to seed this and see what falls out.
Yep. And nonetheless, I mean, it worked, right? We're here talking about it, so clearly it worked.
All right. So what sets this campaign apart is the method of initial delivery. There's no phishing or social engineering involved in the traditional sense. Instead, the threat actor relies entirely on supply chain infiltration via GitHub, making use of developers' default behavior, cloning, building, and running code with minimal inspection of underlying configuration files. This makes the attack particularly dangerous for technical users who may otherwise consider themselves hard targets. By using commonly trusted formats and platforms, WaterCurse bypasses traditional red flags and relies on execution paths that are inherently trusted within developer workflows. Trend Micro did not specify the full scope of repositories affected or whether any were forked or starred in significant numbers, but they did caution that open source ecosystems remain a soft target. They recommend that developers and security professionals implement stricter inspection procedures for build files, avoid running unfamiliar scripts or projects without sandboxing, and incorporate threat detection tools into their development environments. No CVE has been issued yet, as the campaign doesn't leverage a vulnerability per se, rather it abuses developer trust and ecosystem design. This mode of attack aligns with a growing trend of targeting the dev toolchain itself, not just the applications it produces. I find that interesting that there's no CVE because it's not actually a vulnerability, sort of like and it's not really a social engineering attack. It's a trust-based attack. I don't know what we would call this.
Software supply chain attack. Yeah. Maybe you're kind of getting into the, you're just publishing a malicious repository and creating vectors for people to utilize and bring it into their build process and stuff like that. Yeah, I think it's supply chain attack.
Kind of like the new version of leaving the USB thumb drive in the parking lot of the bank.
There you go. That or I would say, I think very akin to like those malicious libraries that we've seen before. Right. Where not the initial or the secondary library, but a tertiary library in the chain actually contains malicious code, and then it kind of bubbles up through dependencies on dependencies. Yeah. And then next thing you know, it's there. So it's kind of like, what's the thing that no one's paying attention to? Can I run code inside of it? Perfect. That's where I'm going to be.
Yeah. So this one we just talked about recently in a broader sense, a report that Google made, but here is what they warned about in action. The threat actor known as Scattered Spider, also tracked as UNC3944 by Google and Mandiant, has apparently shifted its operational focus from the retail sector to the U.S. insurance industry, according to a new alert from Google's Threat Intelligence Group. This group, active for several years and known for high-impact ransomware and extortion campaigns, had previously targeted major UK retailers, including Co-op, Harrods, I don't know how to say
Harrods? Harrods.
Harrods?
Yeah, Harrods.
Let's say Harrods. And MS, often in coordination with or parallel to a ransomware actor named Dragon Force. These campaigns typically involve sophisticated social engineering, especially targeting help desks and the internal support workflows to gain initial access. The new wave of activity against insurance firms highlights Scattered Spider's tendency to focus intensely on one sector at a time. According to John Hultquist, Google's chief analyst, the group's preferred methods continue to include credential harvesting through impersonation, followed by data theft and extortion, with a strong emphasis on abusing weak internal identity verification at call centers and support desks. While Google hasn't disclosed specific technical details from the latest intrusions, the company referenced prior guidance released for defending against these attack patterns, which largely revolve around improving internal security controls for identity validation and help desk workflows. So for anybody listening who thinks that their help desk verification process is awesome, don't take too much for granted, because these guys got past. This is how they got into Caesar's Palace and ransomed Las Vegas a year and a half or 2 years ago, however long it's been. So,
yeah,
I'm sure those folks got their ducks in a row for the most part, and for them to get in that way is just a little bit shocking.
I mean, to be clear, like Scattered Spider is not a, amateur run-of-the-mill kind of threat actor. They've very, very skilled at what they do, what their objectives and their capabilities are. Again, I'm not giving a threat actor a compliment, just making an adversarial observation. But Chris, to your point, right, they understand the identity workflows within a lot of organizations. They know how to use and abuse those to get into an organization. They know how to kind of take advantage of what might seem like a pretty straightforward or easy process of verification, right? But we'll just rely to the help desk. We'll kind of lean on the human factor to be like our last and final wall of defense. And it's like they understand how all that stuff works. They know how to use it to their advantage. There's kind of a continued ongoing analysis of Scattered Spider and some of the things that their capabilities are. Obviously, being a spider, there's a financial motivation in what they do. That's typically associated with kind of where they're at, but then that may lead to like a ransomware deployment or something like that. But yeah, the cases they've been involved with, the major UK retailers you talked about, and then just the plethora of things that we've seen published about Scattered Spider. I think we're going to see this threat actor around for a little while, longer, more so than we have. We're going to continue to see an abuse of identity systems. We're going to continue to see an abuse of endpoint systems. We're going to continue to see them take advantage of legitimate access mechanisms that are post MFA and utilize that to get in to organizations. So a lot of those like frontline defenses that people have kind of deployed and leaned on as like, oh, well, we've got this stuff in place. So that doesn't prevent all attacks, but it makes them harder to do. It's like this threat actor knows their way around those. So within the Google post, which I think, Chris, you'll post in the show notes here, within the Google link, there's a lot of remediation and preparation advice that I recommend almost any and every organization do. Yeah. And I would highly recommend, walking through these different steps, regardless of what industry you're in. Scattered Spider has jumped across multiple industries, as we've seen. They have focused on retail lately. However, like I said, I would continue to, I would continue to like be vigilant and pay attention here.
Yeah, they're just taking their trade craft and applying it to different industries to see where they can get paid. So, although Google hasn't confirmed any specific victims in the insurance sector, one potential target might be Erie Insurance, a Pennsylvania-based company that disclosed a breach on June 7th. While Erie has not attributed the incident to any particular group, and Security Week notes that attribution remains unconfirmed, the timing aligns closely with the observed shift in Scattered Spider's targeting. The group is known to go dark following law enforcement crackdowns, only to reemerge with refined tactics and new sectors in its sights. Given Scattered Spider's operational patterns, sector-specific targeting, use of social engineering, and a focus on extortion, organizations in insurance and the adjacent fields are being urged to elevate internal awareness and revisit protocols for user verification, especially at help desks. Google's prior recommendation, including enforcing multi-factor authentication across all systems, limiting help desk ability to reset credentials without high assurance identity validation, and monitoring for anomalous requests originating from internal support channels. The risk here isn't just ransomware or data theft, it's a reputational and regulatory fallout that can follow a successful breach in a high-trust sector like insurance. Yeah, kind of amazed these guys are still around after what they did in Vegas. I figured that would have brought the hammer of the law back down on their heads, but they seem to be crafty.
We can dream, sir. We can dream these threat actors will suffer a little bit more interruptions in the future, but for now, we'll have to take, whatever pieces we can. A huge props, as always, to the law enforcement teams that we do talk about in some episodes with your massive global takedowns, but if you could throw Scattered Spider into the crosshairs, we'd love it, because we'd love to talk about bringing those guys down. They've caused some serious damage over the years.
Awesome, Matt. This wraps up 223 or 224. We'll see where it comes out in the editing sequence. But we're cooking along. So thanks again for joining me, and we'll see you next week.
Always a pleasure to be here. I'll see you next week.
Okay, bye, sir.
Take care. Bye.